Hello, and welcome to the second episode in my Intro to Blender series. In this episode, it's going to be a pretty short one because we're only going to go over some other basic tools, navigating the 3D workspace, and really building off of the things we learned in the last episode. So strap in, get ready, and let's begin. Okay, so like we discussed before, again, we talked about navigating the Blender workspace in the previous episode. In this episode, we're going to also look at some other tools you can use when you're navigating the workspace, and we're also going to start working with 3D objects. So, like we discussed last class, you know the basic orientation and navigation tools. You know how to orbit, you know how to pan, you know how to zoom in and out, and you also know how to use your number pad to get precise views and profile views on your object. Now, in the previous episode, we also talked about doing some basic transformations, and these include G to grab or move, R to rotate, and S to scale. Now, in the previous episode, we also talked about something called axis locking, where if we do R to rotate, and then we do Z to rotate around the Z or Z axis, our cube will now rotate along the axis we select. And we also discussed when we type in a number, let's say 90 degrees, our cube will rotate to 90 degrees. Let's try 45, and you see the same thing. And this also works for negative numbers. So if we type in negative 45, our cube will rotate negative 45. We also discussed, building on that, the global navigation and the coordinate system that Blender uses. For example, moving up 10 units in Blender would be 10 of Blender's virtual units, and moving down, let's say, another 10, brings it back to where it was. So it's basically like a 3D coordinate system, and if you ever want to know where your object is, and like its precise units, you can go over, you can tab in N, you can click N, and it will bring up this tab on the side. You can go up here to Item, and then you can see your object's transforms. And what this means is, let's say I move my cube randomly, I can see it is at negative 3x, 7.6y, and 4.7z. And of course, if I want to clear it, I can, of course, type in 0 for all of these and basically clear everything. And this also applies for the rotation, of course. But that's a bit cumbersome. So we also discussed in the previous episode, if you go Alt-G, that clears your transformations, that clears your movements. If you do Alt-R, that clears your rotations. And if we scaled it and then we do Alt-S, that scales, or it should clear your scale as well. Okay, so beyond that recap, I know we have yet to discuss how to add and delete objects. Now that we know some basic transformations, let's say we want to get more involved, and the way we're going to add objects is with this special tool right here. You may have noticed it, even when we moved our cube around, you have this little red and white cursor almost. And you may be wondering, all right, how do I access it? It's not left click and it's not right click because those do different things. And the way that you access it is actually by going Shift and then right click. And what this is something called a 3D cursor. And a 3D cursor basically shows Blender it kind of a point in space. And through this point is where we're going to be adding our new objects. If you want to be more precise in where your 3D cursor is located, you can again type in N, go over to this panel here, and go over to, I believe it's View, and under View, there is a panel called 3D Cursor. And again, you can type in precise coordinates. Let's say I want my 3D cursor back at the center, and you can basically center your 3D cursor. There's a rotation here, although I'm not really sure why this exists. I'm sure there is a reason for the 3D cursor having a rotation. But beyond that, that is the basic gist of what the 3D cursor is. Now, let's say I want to put the 3D cursor at another object, and I'll type in N to get rid of that panel. What I mean by that is, let's say I want to have my 3D cursor be at the center of this object. And the tool or the keys I have to press to do that is Shift S. So once you type in Shift S, it brings up this whole key wheel. And these all have different things you can do with the 3D cursor. And the one I want to type in is cursor to selected. So I can just click that, and it snaps my cursor right to the object. And if I move my cube, I can do Shift S and do the same thing, cursor to selected. Now what's very interesting is that you can do the opposite as well. So let's say I put my cursor somewhere, and I want to snap my object now to my cursor. I can go Shift S and do selection to cursor, and it will snap my cube over to my cursor. Now another thing you may have noticed is that when I mentioned the center of the cube, what I'm really talking about is this tiny yellow dot of the cube. And if I move my cube around using G to do so, you're going to notice that the yellow dot moves around as well. And if I rotate, you're going to see that the rotation occurs around this yellow dot. Now this yellow dot doesn't actually have to be the center of an object. It's just telling Blender where you want a proposed center to be. So this yellow dot is more of it's more of a pivot point, I guess, of where the object is. So it'll get more obvious once we get to the following tutorials when I talk about edit mode and I explain this in more depth. But for now, you just have to know that this yellow dot is basically an approximation of the center of the object. Okay, so with that all out of the way, we know now how to use our cursor. Remember, you can use Shift and then right mouse button, and that basically places the cursor, or you can use Shift S, and that gives you a more accurate tool set for using the cursor. Okay. And now what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to add a new object. So if we go Shift A to add, we have this whole panel here of objects we can add. Now, these are the basic objects that you will have if you're starting Blender from scratch. I have a bunch of add-ons installed. That's why you see all of these things at the bottom. Most of these come shipped with Blender, and you can add them. If you want, I might have a tutorial on how to do add-ons and how to install add-ons. But for now, you only have to worry about everything from the plane to the monkey. So these are the basic primitive objects that Blender ships out with. And these are a nice starting point for more complicated modeling. But for now, let's go over and click on monkey. So this is a cute little monkey that Blender has as one of its primitives. Her name is Suzanne. There's a whole story about her if you go over to the Blender wiki or you read up. But anyway, she's basically just a test model, um, and we're just going to use her to show some other some other tools that you can use in the 3D workspace in Blender. All right, so we now know how to add objects. Again, that's Shift A, and they will all add from the 3D cursor. The question now is, how do we delete objects? Okay, so if we click on, let's say, our cube, what we can do now is we can type in X and then click delete, and that deletes our cube. Now, if we do Control Z to bring our cube back, there are also other ways to do it. If we do delete, or in my case, because I'm on a Mac, I believe it's Control Delete. It may not work on Macs, but I'm pretty sure if you do backspace on a PC, it should delete your cube. But anyway, there are different ways to delete, and you can of course set that in your preferences, but the main way is just going X and clicking delete, and that deletes your cube. Okay, so now we have Suzanne over here. All right, so some other things I want to show. So we learned about, grabbing, rotating, scaling, and we also learned how to add objects, and we learned how to delete objects. I also want to show you how do you duplicate objects. Let's say I want two Suzannes or two monkeys. What I can do is type in Shift D, and that will automatically duplicate a second monkey. Now what you're going to notice is that as soon as I typed in Shift D, it duplicated the monkey, and it put it basically in move or grab mode. And what that means is I can right now just do Y and X or Z and immediately lock my duplicated object. So that's an interesting thing Blender does. When you duplicate an object, it automatically puts it in kind of like a move setting. So I'll do X, and let's say I'll type in -2 or -4 and put it right next to the older monkey. Okay, and that's basically showing how to duplicate objects. So again, that's Shift D, and you can duplicate a bunch of objects using that. And then to get rid of them, it's again X to delete. Okay. So that is some basic tools. And this is just a really short episode, mainly because I just want to get you acclimated to using the workspace and really figuring out the tools. Again, if you're at home, you just want to practice playing around within object mode. In the next episode, we're going to be covering how do you start modeling, and to do that, we're going to enter edit mode. But that's it for this episode. Again, it's just a really short one. If you like my content and you want to see more, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you're updated when I release the next episode. And anyways, that's it, and thank you for watching.